Welcome, hello, how y'all doing? It is closer to a daily dose of D. It's your dose of D for today, daily. That's how that works. Hope y'all been chilling, living life, all that good stuff. We're gonna read some books, we're gonna read some poetry. I think that's about it. Kind of just chilling. Been taking care of shit as it arises and just keep putting band-aids on shit that needs fixed. Whatever. Anyways, to begin. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I feel kind of distracted, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. We are going to pick up where we left off in The Ship of Fools by Sebastian Brant. So we read the introduction. No, we read the prologue. A prologue to The Ship of Fools, also by Sebastian Brant. Obviously, that one wasn't just someone else's introduction, that's why. Okay, so The Ship of Fools by Sebastian Brant. Chapter 1. Of Useless Books. There's a little quote on the top in italics that we're going to read first. It says, "First in this dance of fools I stand, for though I've books on every hand, I read them not, nor understand." So, Chapter 1, of Useless Books. That I'm the first one to embark, it means I've made special mark. The reason is, as one discovers, my wisdom's bound in leather covers. Though I can barely read a word, I have of books amassed a hoard. Revering them each day I just keep volumes free of flies and dust. When talk to your edition falls, I say my learning lines my walls. For my delight it's quite enough that I own heaps of printed stuff. King Ptolemy once gave his orders to fetch all books beyond his borders. He held them for his chiefest treasure, but only dipped in slightest measure, nor broke his head upon a tome. Like him I've many books at home, but to what end should I constrain myself at study, crack my brain, and fret myself with learned works? A little learning gives you quirks. No, I am like the rich men say, who keeps a scholar in his pay. I can in learned conversation use ita as a nice evasion. Though happiest with vulgar speech, tongues learned are beyond my reach. My Latin's not sophisticated. I know that Venum's wine translated, a guckless gawk, a stultless fool, and I'm called doctor in the school. My ass's ears concealed at least, else I'd appear the miller's beast. Chapter 2. Fools who allow the wind to settle, their troubles are in sorry fettle. They drive their swine into the kettle. Chapter 2. Of good counselors. O legion those who feel the need to haste to counsel with all speed, who know not right or wrong at all, but blindly sit around the hall. The loyal Hushai breathes no more. Ahithophel sneaked in the door. The counselor with clearest sight should follow simply what is right. He shouldn't merely be the tool to kill the pigs of some poor fool. For truly judgments without reason cannot be proper any season. Wise counsel thereby is decreased whenever search for it has ceased. Let judges probe beyond the fact, and knowing more wisely act. All judges wait the judgment day. This is no joke, heed what I say. If each one knew the final hour, he'd not deal lightly with his power. As you pass sentence, so recall that God will sentence you for all. As you judge me, I judge you too, but he gives final judgment true. Each one awaits within his grave the sentence he himself once gave. Whoever injures justice here should count his days with holy fear. Make what you utter just and fair, or wear a millstone while you're there. Who here gives justice small regard, will find his latter times are hard. No wisdom, insight, power prevails. Opposed to God, all counsel fails. I'll read a couple more. Chapter 3. A fool who stands before you here sets all his store on worldly gear and hopes his wealth will bring him cheer. Of greed. Chapter 3. Now they are fools who gather gear, which brings them neither peace nor cheer, and never know for whom they save, when in that cellar dark, the grave. More foolish they who squander free their wealth in foolish luxury. God does not grant it as a gift, but asks for management with thrift. They answer at the judgment seat, and lose more there than hands or feet. Like thieves who've stolen bread or meat, rich fools leave money to their friends, and seldom serve their own soul's ends. The set of blind and greedy hashes get scurvy while they ward off rashes. Thus many fools to riches turn, for which in hell they're sure to burn, relying on their heirs alone, who wouldn't move to lift a stone, or give a penny for salvation of kindred souls in deep damnation. Use wealth to honor God while here, you cannot serve two masters there. A wise man never counts the worth of getting riches here on earth. He'd rather understand himself, be known for wisdom, not for pelf. The final drink which Crassus took was gold forced down by hook or crook. To learning Crates took a nation, and tossed his money into the ocean. To learning Crates took a notion, and tossed his money in the ocean. Who sets his mind on earthly wealth, just inundates his soul with filth. This is a bit gaudy, a bit Abrahamic for my taste. Yeah. We're going to read this last one then. Okay. Chapter 4. Who introduces through the land disgraceful ways that modes demand. With fools he travels hand in hand. Chapter 4 of Newfangled Ways. What once was held a plain disgrace is now approved and commonplace. The manliness which beards once meant succumbs to monstrous regiment of women whom the men have aped, who show abroad their bare necks scraped. Wear rings and chains without restraint, till holy Leonard seems their saint, who cared for those by chains distressed. Their locks and curls are nightly pressed. With sulphur resin egg-white dressed, they hang their heads out in the air. With fire and sun they bleach their hair, and drive out vermin lurking there. The lice, however, aren't defeated, for garments are so fully pleated. The trousers, collars, shirts men use, with ornamented robes and shoes, make them a race of... Yeah, this is some Christian shit. Holy fuck. I'm gonna read it, but this is... With ornamented robes and shoes, make them a race of caftan Jews. So this is some hateful shit. That's some hate speech right there. We like it. We don't. A new style comes, the old goes by. Folk listen to the cuckoo's cry. The wind of change in every land makes scandal thrive on every hand. The jacket's cut so short and bold, one's very navel must get cold. Oh, woe unto the German nation, what wasn't meant for observation, what nature wants us to conceal. Fools bear abroad the public weal, falls in an evil situation, who brings it not to castigation, who causes these indecent ways, knows not the reckoning he pays. All right, we're gonna stop there. Holy fuck, Mr. Sebastian. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. This is some hateful stuff. I am not a fan. Quite disappointed, actually. Whew. Well, first and foremost, I don't believe that. I think that's trash. I am not only an atheist, I'm an anti-theist. I think that the introduction of religion is one of the biggest bombs Banes, bombs, banes on our humanity. The purpose of life is life. Any other purpose outside of that is manipulation. Sorry, not sorry. So live your best life. New things are not bad things. Change is not bad. It is not. Mr. Sebastian Brant, I know you were in the 1400s, but damn. Jewish isn't a, well, I mean in our understanding of race, but bro, in a sociological understanding of race, I should say, in a scientific understanding of race, because race is not scientific. Race is a social construct, and so it is scientific only in the sense that the way that we organize socially can be studied and found in patterns, and we can recognize. That's why it's called sociology, because it's a study of the right science-ology. But it is a social construct, not a biological one. And in that sense, it's scientific because it's a social construct, not a biological construct. So it's still scientific, but it's not biological. So in that little synopsis, it's so, oh my Lord. I do not like to edit others' words because I think it's important to recognize the way that people spoke and the really, 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 really trashy things, so we can talk about them. So we can see them and be like, whoo, homie was wildin'. We don't do that. We don't do that. No, sir. God is not all seeing. God is not real. Unless you're talking about the energetic life force that is all living, everything, existence. Sure, that part, because energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And again, if we go back to science and studies and pattern repetitions that we've done for long times. Anyways, when we go to science, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It is transferred, it is modified, it is all of those other things, but not created nor destroyed. So therefore, there is a type of form of connection that is between all living things and the universe, because the universe is living. It has to be. It is growing and evolving and changing. It consumes and it defecates. Our idea of life is very, very limited. This Abrahamic notion that religion has given us, which now exists in the majority of our stuff. I can't believe we're still in particle theory and not string theory. I don't even think string theory is the final step. I just think it's like one step closer to more correctness. Anyways, this is not where, that really threw me for a loop. That was way more Abrahamic shit than I was expecting. And like way too, praise God. Shame on the masses. No, homie. Nope. Time out. You have to feel good. You gotta go stay on the bench. We don't do that hate speech no more. No. Okay. Well, let's do all the oldies. Oldies, the ones I used to read in this very short time video channel thing. Fun stuff. Whew. It's cold as shit. Also not wearing a heavy enough hoodie. I'm about to look like a whole grandma, and I don't care. That foot is gonna bother me though. Am I a grandma? Yes, I am. I'm cold. Okay. Should have worn more layers, but I didn't, so. my heater replaced, but they gave me just another old one, which is fine, except for it doesn't work the same way. Like, it, in the same way that the other one didn't work, this one also doesn't work. It doesn't maintain putting out heat. It puts out heat for like 5 minutes, then it stops and starts blowing cold air. The other one I managed to trick into just staying on hot, unless I turned it off and then turned it back on. But this one just at like 10 minutes. It's great. They just replaced it today, like this morning. Okay. Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat. We were reading about laminated doughs and pastries and yummy stuff. So we are still on the fat aspects. Okay. Achieving tenderness. Shortbread cookies and cream biscuits. Shortbread cookies should be tender with a fine sandy crumb. This texture is the result of incorporating fat into flour early in the dough making process. My favorite shortbread recipe calls for butter so soft it's spreadable like mayonnaise, so that the fat can readily coat flour particles and keep gluten strands from developing. Excuse me. Use any soft or liquid fat, including cream, creme fraiche. I don't know if that's how you say that. I'm really bad at French. Softened cream cheese or oil to coat flour and achieve tender textures. In classic recipes for cream biscuits, cold whipping cream functions as both the fat and the liquid binder, quickly coating the flour and obviating the need for additional water to develop the gluten network. Achieving flakiness, pie dough. There's a chart in here that zooms in on a shortbread, a pie, and a palmier. And it shows what the gluten strands look like. You can pause it later if you want to. So, shortbread, pie, palmier, and then non-connected, a little bit still less connected, kind of connected, right? So, I think that's the vibe. Achieving flakiness, pie dough. Guided by lore almost as much as science, the rules of making flaky pastry appealed to my old wives' tale loving heart. Stories of pastry chefs landing jobs due to their cold hands are commonplace, since it's so important to keep the fat for flaky pastry dough chilled. While there's little evidence to prove that rumor, there's plenty to support pastry chefs' compulsion to keep everything cold. They work on cool marble countertops and freeze their mixer bowls and metal tools. One pastry chef with whom I worked for years even insisted on making her doughs in a freezing cold kitchen. With a sweater and puffy vest layered over her chef's coat, she'd get to work 2 hours before anyone else, then rush to mix her doughs before the rest of us arrived and lit the ovens, stove, and grill. She made every decision with temperature in mind, and it paid off. Her pastries were ethereally flaky. Cold-handed or not, consider temperature when you seek flakiness to create layers of developed gluten interspersed by pockets of fat. The warmer and hence softer your butter, the more readily it will combine with the flour. Because fat inhibits gluten development, the more intimately the two ingredients combine, the more tender, not flaky, a dough will be. To prevent gluten from developing, keep butter cold. This will protect the delicate bonds with its emulsion while you mix and roll dough. Butter contains about 15 to 20% water by weight. If butter softens and melts as it's worked into the dough, its emulsion will break, releasing that water. Water droplets will bind with the flour, developing into long gluten strands that will cause the dough's delicate layers to stick together. If they're stuck together, they can't steam apart and flake as they bake. The pastry will emerge from the oven chewy and elastic. Vegetable shortening, Crisco for example, is more forgiving of rising temperatures than butter and will remain in solid form even in a warm kitchen, but it just doesn't taste as good. By the time it reaches body temperature, butter melts away, leaving behind its rich, satisfying flavor as the tongue's lone souvenir. In contrast, the same chemical qualities that make shortening more stable at warm temperatures keep it from melting away at body temperature, leaving an unpleasant, plasticky residue on the tongue. I prefer not to sacrifice flavor for the forgiveness that shortening offers. There is a trade-off. Certain measures must be taken to achieve a buttery pie crust flaky enough to shatter at the lightest touch of a fork. At home, chill the diced butter, flour, and tools in the freezer before you start, in order to encourage the butter to remain in distinct chunks even as you work it into the dough. Work quickly to reduce the threat of its softening. Don't overmix. And finally, ensure that the dough spends plenty of time chilling in the fridge between the steps of mixing, rolling, assembling, and baking. I find it easiest to make pastry dough in advance and keep it tightly wrapped in the freezer, where it can stay for up to 2 months. That cuts out the most time-intensive step, freeing me to make and bake my pie when the fancy strikes. It's important to slide the chilled assembled pie directly into a preheated oven. In a hot oven, the water contained in the butter will quickly evaporate. The steam will push apart layers of dough as it expands with heat, yielding the flakes we so prize. If the oven's not sufficiently hot, the water won't evaporate and the crust won't set before the filling seeps in, and the pie will emerge from the oven disappointingly soggy. Achieving flakiness and tenderness, tart dough. Prone to bouts of overindulgence at the farmer's market, I tend to find myself with more produce at any given time than I know I can use up. You trying saying no to ripe Santa Rosa plums, perfectly sweet tart nectarines, and juicy boysenberries, which always come into season on exactly the same day. With an understanding of the science of fat, my friend Aaron Hyman sought to develop a tart dough that's structured yet delicate. My necklace is itching. His ideal dough would stand up to mounds of juicy summerstone fruit, but still yield flaky shards when bitten. He wanted a crust that would be both flaky and tender, and I wanted a crust that I could bake any time I had extra fruit on hand. First, he thought about how to achieve flakiness. He decided to keep everything cold, using large chunks of butter, and mix the dough just enough to form a small amount of gluten for the flaky layers. Then, to achieve tenderness, he selected liquid fats to bind the dough, cream and creme fraiche, and coat the remaining loose flour with fat to prevent further gluten development. Aaron's method is foolproof. I've always struggled with pastry dough, but his recipe leads me to success every time. With Aaron's tart dough in the freezer, a regal dinner is always within reach. Stockpile several discs of dough for the moment when you want to invite friends over and have little more in the pantry than a basket of aging onions, a Parmesan rind, and a can of anchovies. Or when you realize you've committed to bringing dessert to a party but doubt you have the time to make anything special. Or when you got a little overboard at the farmer's market. Tart dough is the key to making something out of nothing. All right, we're gonna pause and switch. And this is the one. We haven't read this one in a minute because I didn't know where it was. People's Guide to Capitalism by Hadas Thier. An Introduction to Marxist Economics. I said the scary word. I said so many scary words. I said capitalism. That's a scary word that people don't like. They just like to call it economics, but that's not true. It's just one system of economics, and it's a very, very exploitative system. And for those that don't know what the word exploitative is, even though it gets used all the goddamn time and often misused, exploitative just means that they are taking more than they are compensating. So if you work in any field, in any job, if you are a laborer, and not a bureaucratic paper pusher, but even bureaucratic paper pushers, but I also have mixed feelings. If you were a laborer, if you were a worker, which is the majority of Americans, you are getting stolen from, because it is capitalism, and it is illegal for them to steal from you. You produce that they cannot, they undercompensate, and they take what is left, and that is called profit. That undercompensation is theft, legal theft. So under Marxism, or communism, which is the scary word, because again, it is somehow used all the time and misused. Due compensation is compensated. Anyway, A People's Guide to Capitalism by Hadas Thier. I'm not entirely sure which one we're on, so we're just gonna start on the other one, and if I end up repeating paragraph, I'm sorry to those of you who actually listen to all of this. Maybe we needed a repeat, who the hell knows. Generations of labor. The value of a commodity is not solely determined by the labor that directly produced it. The worth of a table, a jetliner, or an iPhone must also include the raw materials, tools, and technology used in the production of these commodities, from wood to turbines to microchips. But these raw materials and machinery are themselves commodities created by labor. As such, they all carry their own labor-determined value into the production of a new commodity. Essentially, their value simply gets passed into the value of the table, jetliner, or iPhone. I feel like I read this one. Meh. To explain the point, it's useful to distinguish between what Marx identified as living labor, human labor that goes into the production of a commodity in the present time, and dead labor, previous generations of labor that carry past value into the process of production. Let's go back to the table making example. I said, arbitrarily but for the sake of simplicity, that it would take, on average, 2 hours of labor, including design and manufacture, to make a table. But in order to produce a table, a furniture company will also have to buy materials: wood planks, glue, screws, and equipment: power saws, clamps, sanders, factory belts, and computer programs that generate cutting specifications. Let's say that 45 minutes of labor produced the amount of wood used, and another 15 minutes of labor generated the glue, screws, etc. used for making one table. That's another hour's worth of labor that is hidden in the production process. The raw materials simply pass on their value into a new product, the table. Similarly, the value of the equipment used adds a fraction of its value to every round of production. Why a fraction? Take, for example, the value of a factory standard wide belt sander. It costs about $12,000. Assume, again, arbitrarily, that an average sander lasts for about 4 years before it becomes too worn out to be effectively used. That means that each year, the machine transfers about a quarter of its value to the tables that it sands. During its lifespan, it will, the capitalists hope, pass its full value into the goods it's used to produce. By the time we add in the labor passed on from all the other machinery and rent paid for the factory in which it's manufactured, its value will be greater still. The point of this very hypothetical example is, of course, not to determine exact prices, but to show how every component and input into production is measured by socially necessary labor time. Understanding that previous generations of labor embodied in the equipment and materials are quote-unquote dead labor, but labor nonetheless, highlights the point that workers create value, not, as mainstream economics asserts, a combination of capitalist ingenuity, technology, and perhaps a nod to the workers manning that technology. And insofar as they are dead labor, they pass on only the value that was already imbued in them in the past. They cannot, like labor, create new wealth. As Marx explained, a machine which is not active in the labor process is useless. In addition, it falls prey to the destructive power of natural processes. Iron rusts, wood rots, yarn with which we neither weave nor knit is caught and wasted. Living labor must seize upon these things, awaken them from the dead, change them from merely possible into real and effective use values. Bathed in the fire of labor, appropriated as part of its organism, and infused with vital energy for the performance of the functions appropriate to their concept and to their vocations in the process, they are indeed consumed, but to some purpose as elements in the form of new use values, new products which are capable of entering into individual consumption as means of subsistence, or into a new labor process as means of production. Money and fetishism. If we start from this understanding of value, rather than with a surface appearance of prices, the real character of money loses its mystique. Value, which is just a crystallization of abstract labor, is represented by money. We'll see in the next chapter that money is itself a commodity, which by custom and circumstance has become a universal measure against which all other items on the market are exchanged. Instead of saying that it takes an equal amount of time to produce a ballpoint pen as a lifesaver's candy, we can simply say that they both have a value of 10 cents. Thus, by being a portable and universal embodiment of value, money simplifies and mediates the process of trading goods. In Marx's words, money necessarily crystallizes out of the process of exchange. As markets developed, money became a convenient and necessary substitute for simple barters of commodities based on socially agreed upon labor times. With money, a producer of bread doesn't have to go to the marketplace with 10 loaves of bread in order to buy a chair. At the same time, a chair maker doesn't need to exchange her chair for 10 loaves of bread if she only wants one today and another loaf later in the week. Money conveniently stores value over time, which its owner can dispense of as he or she see fit, as they see fit. I'm so done with he or she. Oh my god. Can we please give up the binary? It is simply scientifically inaccurate. It is religious in origin and disgusting. Blech. Money also conceals the true nature of value, so that when you go to the supermarket, you don't think you're trading an equivalent amount of your congealed mass of labor with someone else's. As David Harvey explained, you go into a supermarket and you want to buy a head of lettuce. In order to buy the lettuce, you have to put down a certain sum of money. The material relation between the money and the lettuce express a social relation because the price, the how much, is socially determined, and the price is a monetary representation of value. Hidden within this market exchange of things is a relation between you, the consumer, and the direct producers, those who labor to produce the lettuce. The end result is that our social relation to the laboring activities of others is disguised in the relationships between things. You cannot, for example, figure out in the supermarket whether the lettuce has produced by happy laborers, miserable laborers, slave laborers, wage laborers, or some self-employed peasant. The lettuces are mute, as it were, as to how they were produced and who produced them. The real social relations of production and exchange are therefore hidden behind a veil of what appears to be a relationship between money and commodities. Instead of human relationships, we have economic relationships between goods, or as Marx put it, quote, "It is nothing but the definite social relation between men themselves which assumes here, for them, the fantastic form of relation between things," end quote. The hidden relations of production, wage labor, and, as we'll see, exploitation behind this fantastic form are specific and peculiar characteristics of capitalism. They did not exist in pre-capitalist class societies, which, despite their brutality, lacked the cloak of, quote, fairness that capitalism purports. The process of producing commodities, Marx wrote, has mastery over man instead of the opposite. The process of producing commodities, Marx wrote, has mastery over man instead of the opposite. This is the essence of what Marx dubbed commodity fetishism. What other way can you describe the modern worship of every new generation of Apple products than fetishism? We idolize these things that we consider to be outside and external to us, but in fact are our own creations. By using the term fetishism, Marx was also taking a jab at the philosophers of the Enlightenment, who saw superstition as primitive and hailed the rationality of capitalism. The thinkers of this entitlement, the thinkers of the Enlightenment promoted science and logic, yet had no problem with a warped reality in which things are powerful and valuable, while human beings relate to each other through the exchange of those things. Conclusion. We've traced here the basic contours of Marx's theory of value. We can see now that capitalism is a system where social relations are determined by and subordinated to the exchange of commodities. Each of these commodities has a use value, whether good, for example, fruit, bad, example, nuclear arsenal, or indifferent, example, garbage pail kids. But it is exchange value that concerns capitalists and becomes the criteria through which society determines what is or isn't produced, what is or isn't worth investment. Yet despite the fact that our lives seem to be at the mercy of inanimate exchange values, the role of labor in determining these values has powerful and revolutionary implications. We'll explore the role of labor more fully in future chapters. But first, in order to further demystify the machinations of the system, we'll follow the scent of money to see exactly how it is the coagulated state of value congeals into bills of paper that can be stacked in your wallet or electronically digitized in the bank. The waste of society. Production has expanded exponentially since Marx's time. Our society bursts at the seams with commodities. The drive to make commodities in order to sell them, rather than to directly consume them, gives us a clue as to why the production of commodities expands over the long term. We'll discuss this further in Chapter 5, but the essence is that while there may be a limit to how much one feudal lord and his family can consume, production for the market knows no such natural bounds. Capitalism has left no stone unturned in its quest to commodify all living and non-living matter on the planet, from those as plentiful and mundane as water to those as absurd and abstract as Wall Street's financial cocktails. If there is a dollar to be made, capitalism will find a way to package it up and sell it. One way to measure the phenomenal growth of commodities produced under capitalism is to measure the size of our landfills, which now number about 2,000 across the country, logging in 265 million metric tons of waste. Of course, official landfills don't capture the total amount of commodity production and waste, since much of our waste doesn't end up in landfills. One extreme example is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a floating island of debris in the Pacific Ocean so large it is visible from space. This drifting stew of junk stretches across an area larger than the state of Texas. Along with the wealth of society comes the waste of society. Along with the wealth of society comes the waste of society. Every year, the amount of paper and plastic cups, forks, and spoons used in the United States alone could circle the equator 300 times. There is also a yearly average of about 380 billion plastic bags and wraps, which themselves require 12 million barrels of oil to create. According to Heather Rogers, quote, every American discards more than 1,600 pounds of rubbish a year, more than 4.5 pounds per person per day. Starting in 1960, the U.S. government's Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has measured the country's total municipal solid waste, MSW, essentially the everyday items that make up our garbage, food and yard waste, packaging, office paper, clothing, etc. In 2017, we produced 268 million tons of waste, up from just 88 million tons 6 decades ago. $180 million increase in 60 years. That means it's a 30 million increase every year. A 3 million increase every year? Yeah, a 3 million increase every year. So every year, 2 million more. Next year, 3 more. Of course, municipal garbage is itself a tiny fraction of the overall waste produced, most of which is generated by industry. But unlike municipal waste, industrial waste is largely untracked. An oft-quoted but vastly out-of-date EPA study in the 1980s found that about 7.6 billion tons of manufacturing waste is created annually. This conservative estimate is the equivalent weight of over 20,000 Empire State Buildings. but a lot more toxic. This dramatic increase in annual waste mirrors an overall trend of the system to produce ever-growing amounts of commodities for sale in ever-expanding markets. Take the automobile industry. According to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, there were 74 million automobiles registered in the United States in 1960. By 2017, that number nearly quadrupled to 272 million. More than 96 million automobiles were produced worldwide in 2017 alone. Similarly to in plastics, 381 million tons of plastic were produced annually around the world in 2015. A 200-fold increase since 1950. To put it in context, wrote researchers Hannah Ritchie and Max Rosser, quote, "This is roughly equivalent to the mass of 2/3 of the world population." End quote. A 2014 study found that there were more than 5 trillion pieces of plastic floating in our oceans. That number is surely larger today. It's been 9 years, and we have not slowed production at all. We've increased. The explosion of goods in modern society is not only the result of a growing number of commodities in any given market, but is also a consequence of the number of things which are now considered marketable. The types of things that are now for sale continue to increase as capitalism commodifies a greater and greater share of our lives. This has happened through the privatization of things like healthcare and education, which used to be outside the laws of the capitalist market. It also happened by attaching a price tag to things that previously had none. Rather than finding collective solutions to social problems, all issues are subjugated to the machinations of the market. Corporations can now buy credits to pollute past regulatory standards through the emissions trading market. Thus, November 2012 was the unsettling occasion of the country's first ever auction of greenhouse gas pollution credits in California. The market expands further as it insinuates commercial value to women's bodies and sex on advertisements, and it reaches into every realm of society, taking previously counterculture activities like skateboarding and hawking thousands of magazines, video games, sneakers, and paraphernalia. Taking previous counterculture activities like skateboarding and hawking thousands of magazines, video games, sneakers, and paraphernalia. Kids in the 1980s who made their own ramps to do tricks at home and punks who skated in the 1990s can now buy skateboarding-themed ceramic travel mugs online for $24.95. Along with this expansion comes the ideology of the market as the know-all and cure-all for society's needs. I'm going to repeat that part really quick. When they say leave it up to the market, what they mean is that they have the ideology that the market is the know-all and cure-all for society's needs. And that would only be true. Fuck that. I don't like that statement. That's an absolute statement. We could play with that idea and that concept if people had equal influence. But they don't. And the things that we produce are not for the good of society or individuals. At all. So. As David Harvey explains, to presume that markets and market signals can best determine all allocative decisions is to presume that everything can in principle be treated as a commodity. Commodification presumes the existence of property rights over processes, things, and social relations that a price can be put on them, and that they can be traded subject to legal contract. The market is presumed to work as an appropriate guide, an ethic, for all human action. And that's fucking absurd. That's where we're gonna stop. This guy's really pretty. It's really fucking cold. I may need to get a new heater. Because I'm not playing this game at all. Where is it? Oh, there. one too far away. That's okay. Oh. Well, it's been lovely chilling. We're gonna read this last one. We're gonna call it quits because I'm gonna make me some food because I'm hungry. Yep. Here we have, if you are unfamiliar, The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Can I be Vanna White? I guess we need to walk around and look pretty. Drive me crazy. Oh wait, that is what I do. Except I have to talk. And you stop making faces at the camera. It's so fun. Chapter 22. He was standing with his back to Arthur, watching the very last glimmers of light sink into blackness behind the horizon. He was tallish, elderly, and dressed in a single long gray robe. When he turned, his face was thin and distinguished, careworn but not unkind, the sort of face you would happily bank with. But he didn't turn yet, not even to react to Arthur's yelp of surprise. Eventually, the last rays of sun vanished completely, and he turned. His face was still illuminated from somewhere, and when Arthur looked for the source of light, he saw that a few yards away stood a small craft of some kind. A small hovercraft, Arthur guessed. It shed a dim pool of light around it. The man looked at Arthur, sadly it seemed. "You chose a cold night to visit our dead planet," he said. Who are you?" stammered Arthur. The man looked away. Again, a look of sadness seemed to cross his face. "My name is not important," he said. He seemed to have something on his mind. Conversation was clearly something he felt he didn't have to rush at. Arthur felt awkward. You startled me," he said lamely. The man looked round at him again and slightly raised his eyebrows. He said. "I said you startled me." "Do not be alarmed. I will not harm you." Arthur frowned at him. "But you shot at us. There were missiles," he said. The man gazed into the pit of the crater. The slight glow from Marvin's eyes cast very faint red shadows on the huge carcass of the whale. The man chuckled slightly. "An automatic system," he said, and gave a small sigh. Ancient computers ranged in the bowels of the planet take away the dark millennia, and the ages hang heavy on their dusty databanks. I think they take the occasional pot shot to relieve the monotony. He looked gravely at Arthur and said, "I'm a great fan of science, you know." "Oh, really?" said Arthur, who was beginning to find the man's curious, kindly manner disconcerting. "Oh, yes," said the old man, and simply stopped talking again. "Ah," said Arthur, he had an odd feeling of being like a man in the act of adultery who is surprised when the woman's husband wanders into the room, changes his trousers, passes a few idle remarks about the weather, and leaves again. "You seem ill at ease," said the old man with polite concern. No, well, yes. Actually, you see, we weren't really expecting to find anybody about, in fact. I sort of gathered that you were all dead or something." "Dead?" said the old man. "Good gracious me, no. We have but slept." "Slept?" said Arthur incredulously. "Yes, through the economic recession, you see," said the old man, apparently unconcerned about whether Arthur understood a word he was talking about or not. Arthur had to prompt him again. Economic recession? "Well, you see, 5 million years ago, the galactic economy had collapsed. And seeing that custom-built planets are something of a luxury commodity, you see..." He paused and looked at Arthur. "You know we built planets, do you?" he asked solemnly. "Well, yes," said Arthur. "I sort of gathered." Fascinating trade, said the old man, and a wistful look came into his eyes. "Doing the coastlines was always my favorite. Used to have endless fun doing the little bits in fjords." "So anyway," he said, trying to find his thread again, "the recession came and we decided it would save a lot of bother if we just slept through it. So we programmed the computers to revive us when it was all over." The man stifled a very slight yawn and continued. "The computers were index linked to the galactic stock market prices, you see, so that We'd all be revived when everybody else had rebuilt the economy enough to afford our rather expensive services. Arthur, a regular Guardian reader, was deeply shocked at this. That's a pretty unpleasant way to behave, isn't it? Is it? Asked the old man mildly. I'm sorry, I'm a bit out of touch. He pointed down into the crater. Is that robot yours? He said. No, came a thin metallic voice from the crater. I'm mine. If you'd call it a robot, muttered Arthur, it's more a sort of electronic sulking machine. Bring it, said the old man. Arthur was quite surprised to hear a note of decision suddenly present in the old man's voice. He called to Marvin, who crawled up the slope making a big show of being lame, which he wasn't. On second thoughts, said the old man, leave it here. You must come with me. Great things are afoot. He turned toward his craft which, though no apparent signal had been given, now drifted quietly toward them through the dark. Arthur looked down at Marvin, who now made an equally big show of turning around laboriously and trudging off down into the crater again, muttering sour nothings to himself. Come, said the old man. Come now, or you will be late. Late, said Arthur. What for? What is your name, human? Dent. Arthur Dent, said Arthur. Late, as in the late Dent Arthur Dent, said the old man sternly. It's a sort of threat, you see. Another wistful look came into his tired old eyes. I've never been very good at them myself, but I'm told they can be very effective. Arthur blinked at him. What an extraordinary person, he muttered to himself. I beg your pardon, said the old man. Oh, nothing, I'm sorry, said Arthur in embarrassment. All right, where do we go? In my air car, said the old man, motioning Arthur to get into the craft which he had settled silently next to them. We are going deep into the bowels of the planet where even now our race is being revived from its 5 million year slumber. Magrathea awakes. Arthur shivered involuntarily as he seated himself next to the old man. The strangeness of it, the silent bobbing movement of the craft as it soared into the night sky, quite unsettled him. He looked at the old man, his face illuminated by the dull glow of tiny lights on the instrument panel. Excuse me, he said to him. What is your name, by the way? My name, said the old man, and the same distant sadness came into his face again. He paused. My name, he said, is Slarde Bartfast. Arthur practically choked. I beg your pardon, he spluttered. Slarde Bartfast, repeated the old man quietly. Slarde Bartfast? The old man looked at him gravely. I said it wasn't important, he said. The air car sailed through the night. Chapter 23. When I squint at that, it's because I'm checking the time, because I'm not doing this for much more than an hour. We're working on goals. Reading for an hour is a hard thing. We read many books because I get distracted. Need lots of different stimuli because my brain gets bored. Chapter 23. It is an important and popular fact that things are not always what they seem. For instance, on the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much. The wheel, New York, wars, and so on. Well, all the dolphins had ever done was muck about in the water having a good time. But conversely, the dolphins had always believed that they were far more intelligent than man, for precisely the same reason. Curiously enough, the dolphins had long known of the impending destruction of the planet Earth, and had made many attempts to alert mankind to the danger, but most of their communications were misinterpreted as amusing attempts to punch footballs or whistle for tidbits. So they eventually gave up and left the Earth by their own means shortly before the Vogons arrived. The last ever dolphin message was misinterpreted as a surprisingly sophisticated attempt to do a double backward somersault through a hoop while whistling the Star-Spangled Banner. But in fact, the message was this: so long, and thanks for all the fish. In fact, there was only one species on the planet more intelligent than dolphins, and they spent a lot of their time in behavioral research laboratories running round inside wheels and conducting frighteningly elegant and subtle experiments on man. The fact that once again man completely misinterpreted this relationship was entirely according to these creatures' plans. Chapter 24. Silently, the air car coasted through the cold darkness, a single soft glow of light that was utterly alone in the deep Magrathian night. It sped swiftly. Arthur's companion seemed sunk in his own thoughts, and when Arthur tried on a couple of occasions to engage him in conversation again, he would simply reply by asking if he was comfortable enough, and then left it at that. Arthur tried to gauge the speed at which they were traveling, but the blackness outside was absolute, and he was denied any reference points. The sense of motion was so soft and slight that he could almost believe they were hardly moving at all. Then a tiny glow of light appeared in the far distance, and within seconds had grown so much in size that Arthur realized it was traveling toward them at a colossal speed, and he tried to make out what sort of craft it might be. He peered at it, but was unable to discern any clear shape, and suddenly gasped in alarm as the aircraft dipped sharply and headed downward in what seemed certain to be a collision course. Their relative velocity seemed unbelievable, and Arthur had hardly time to draw breath before it was all over. The next thing he was aware of was an insane silver blur that seemed to surround him. He twisted his head sharply round and saw a small black point dwindling rapidly in the distance behind them, and it took him several seconds to realize what had happened. They had plunged into a tunnel in the ground. The colossal speed had been their own, relative to the glow of light which was a stationary hole in the ground, the mouth of the tunnel. The insane blur of silver was the circular wall of the tunnel down which they were now shooting, apparently at several hundred miles an hour. He closed his eyes in terror. After a length of time which he made no attempt to judge, he sensed a slight subsidence in their speed, and some while later became aware that they were gradually gliding to a gentle halt. He opened his eyes again. They were still in the silver tunnel, threading and weaving their way through what appeared to be a crisscross warren of converging tunnels. When they finally stopped, it was in a small chamber of curved steel. Several tunnels also had their termini here, and at the farther end of the chamber, Arthur could see a large circle of dim, irritating light. It was irritating because it played tricks with the eyes. It was impossible to focus on it properly or tell how near or far it was. Arthur guessed, quite wrongly, that it might be ultraviolet. Slartibartfast turned and regarded Arthur with his solemn old eyes. "Earthman," he said, "we are now deep in the heart of Magrathea." "How did you know I was an Earthman?" demanded Arthur. "These things will become clear to you," said the old man gently. "At least," he added with slight doubt in his voice, "clearer than they are at the moment." He continued, "I should warn you that the chamber we are about to pass into does not literally exist within our planet. It is a little too large. We are about to pass through a gateway into a vast tract of hyperspace. It may disturb you." Arthur made nervous noises. Slartibartfast touched a button and added, not entirely reassuringly, "It scares the willies out of me. Hold tight." The car shot forward straight into the circle of light, and suddenly Arthur had a fairly clear idea of what infinity looked like. It wasn't infinity, in fact. Infinity itself looks flat and uninteresting. Looking up into the night sky is looking into infinity. Distance is incomprehensible and therefore meaningless. The chamber into which the air car emerged was anything but infinite. It was just very, very, very big. So big that it gave the impression of infinity far better than infinity itself. Arthur's senses bobbed and spun as, traveling at the immense speed he knew the aircraft attained, they climbed slowly through the open air, leaving the gateway through which they had passed an invisible pinprick in the shimmering wall behind them. The wall. The wall defied the imagination, seduced it and defeated it. The wall was so paralyzingly vast and sheer that its top, bottom, and sides passed away beyond the reach of sight. The mere shock of vertigo could kill a man. The wall appeared perfectly flat. It would take the finest laser measuring equipment to detect that as it climbed, apparently to infinity, as it dropped dizzily away, as it planed out to either side, it also curved. It met itself again 13 light seconds away. In other words, the wall formed the inside of the hollow sphere. A sphere over 3 million miles across and flooded with unimaginable light. "Welcome," said Slartibartfast, as the tiny speck that was the air car, traveling now at 3 times the speed of sound, crept imperceptibly forward into the mind-boggling space. "Welcome," he said, "to our factory floor." Arthur stared about him in a kind of wonderful horror. Ranged away before them, at distances he could neither judge nor even guess at, were a series of curious suspensions, delicate traceries. I cannot see. The sun has gone down. I just kicked the chair with my ankle bone, my heel bone. Oh, it hurts so bad. That felt very unpleasant. I think I'm gonna turn. Got 2 pages left, but it hurts. It hurts my eyes. I'm gonna turn the light on. Oh my gosh, I can see. It's a miracle. Arthur stared about him in a kind of wonderful horror, ranged away before them at distances he could neither judge nor even guess at, where a series of curious suspensions, delicate traceries of metal and light hung about shadowy spherical shapes that hung in the space. This, said Slardebart fast, is where we made most of our planets, you see. You mean, said Arthur, trying to form the words, you mean you're starting it all up again now? No, good heavens, no, exclaimed the old man. No, the galaxy isn't nearly rich enough to support us yet. No, we've been awakened to perform just one extraordinary commission for very special clients from another dimension. It may interest you. They're in the distance in front of us. Arthur followed the old man's finger till he was able to pick out the floating structure he was pointing at. It was indeed the only one of the many structures that betrayed any sign of activity about it, though this was more a subliminal impression than anything one could put one's finger on. At that moment, however, a flash of light arced through the structure and revealed in stark relief the patterns that were formed on the dark sphere within. Patterns that Arthur knew. Rough, blobby shapes that were as familiar to him as the shapes of words, part of the furniture of his mind. For a few seconds, he sat in stunned silence as the images rushed around his mind and tried to find somewhere to settle down and make sense. Part of his brain told him that he knew perfectly well what he was looking at and what the shapes represented, while another quite sensibly refused to countenance the idea and abdicated responsibility for any further thinking in that direction. The flash came again, and this time there could be no doubt. The Earth, whispered Arthur. Well, the Earth Mark II, in fact, said Slardebart fast, cheerfully. We're making a copy from our original blueprints. There was a pause. Are you trying to tell me, said Arthur slowly and with control, that you originally made the Earth? Oh yes, said Slardebart fast. Did you ever go to a place, I think it was called Norway? No, said Arthur, no I didn't. Pity, said Slardebart fast. That was one of mine. Won an award, you know. Lovely crinkly edges. I was most upset to hear of its destruction. You were upset? Yes, 5 minutes later, and it wouldn't have mattered so much. It was quite shocking cock-up. It was a quite shocking cock-up. Huh? Said Arthur. The mice were furious. The mice were furious. Oh yes, said the old man mildly. Yes, well, so I expect we're the dogs and cats and duck-billed platypuses, but they hadn't paid for it, you see, had they? Look, said Arthur, would it save you a lot of time if I just gave up and went mad now? For a while the air car flew on in awkward silence. Then the old man tried patiently to explain. Earthman, the planet you lived on was commissioned, paid for, and run by mice. It was destroyed 5 minutes before the completion of the purpose for which it was built, and we've got to build another one. Only one word was registering with Arthur. Mice, he said. Indeed, Earthmen. Look, sorry, are we talking about the little white furry things with the cheese fixation and women standing on tables screaming in early 60s sitcoms? Slartibartfast coughed politely. Earthmen, he said, it is sometimes hard to follow your mode of speech. Remember, I have been asleep inside this planet of Magrathea for 5 million years and know little of these early 60s sitcoms of which you speak. These creatures you call mice, you see, they are not quite as they appear. They are merely the protrusion into our dimension of vastly hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings. The whole business with the cheese and the squeaking is just a front. The old man paused, and with a sympathetic frown continued. They've been experimenting on you, I'm afraid. Arthur thought about this for a second, and then his face cleared. Ah, no, he said. I see the source of the misunderstanding now. No. Look, you see what happened was what we used to do was that we used to do experiments on them. They were often used in behavioral research, Pavlov and all that sort of stuff. So what happened was that the mice would be set all sorts of tests, learning to ring bells, run around mazes and things so that the whole nature of the learning process could be examined. From our observation of their behavior, we were able to learn all sorts of things about our own. Arthur's voice trailed off. Such subtlety, said Slartibartfast. One has to admire it. What? Said Arthur. How better to disguise their real natures, and how better to guide your thinking? Suddenly running down a maze the wrong way, eating the wrong bit of cheese, unexpectedly dropping dead of maximatosis. If it's finely calculated, the cumulative effect is enormous. He paused for effect. You see, Earthmen, they really are particularly clever, hyper-intelligent pan-dimensional beings. Your planet and people have formed the matrix of an organic computer running a 10 million year research program. Let me tell you the whole story. It'll take a little time. Time, said Arthur weakly, is not currently one of my problems. And that is where we believe that. Thank you so much for joining. I had a lovely time. I'm gonna go put on an extra hoodie because it's cold as shit. I'm gonna turn the heat around because it's cold as shit. We're gonna hope that the heat comes out, and I'm really glad, but I'm really hopeful. I'm just really hopeful for a life. No, I'm grateful and glad for any of you folks who enjoyed this, stuck around, had fun, learned something, rested, whatever this is for you. Thanks for joining me for my reads. See you next time for your daily dose. Your dose of D for the day. I need to not call it a daily dose. I think I'm gonna call it a dose of D for the day. Get that big D energy. I don't even need to be a man. Catch y'all later. Have a great one. Okay, bye. Nope.